Distance is one of those things that can bring immense comfort or incredible unease depending on the situation and the individual. When fighter pilots engage with a target, being able to close the gap quickly or maneuver away faster is an essential element to helping maintain the upper hand. But fighter pilots have to be comfortable in all the spaces in between, whether it's close or as far as possible. Former F-18 fighter pilot and member of the famed strike fighter squadron, the Red Rivers, Lieutenant Ryan Graves is a noted military tactician, artificial intelligence, quantum mechanics, and autonomous drone specialist, just to name a few. He also happens to be one of a handful of people out of billions on Earth who has had dozens, if not hundreds, of first-hand encounters with strange objects in the sky. Armed with skills of observation and assessment, the Pentagon has spent millions refining and training him to apply those skills in high-stress situations while engaging in mental synchronicity with some of the most advanced technology fighter planes carry. So when he says there are strange objects in the sky that demands a massive, coordinated, public fact-finding mission to try to understand what is happening, there is probably a very good reason. A decade ago, when Graves says he first began encountering these objects, they initially appeared as singles and doubles. They would turn up while flying his missions and exercises mainly out of Virginia off the U.S. Atlantic coast, where the bulk of the Eastern U.S. Navy fleet is based. According to Graves, the objects he saw were always cubes in a transparent sphere, about 10 feet or so in diameter. Now, the four corners of which always seemed to touch the inner lining of that bubble. They moved incredibly fast, had amazing maneuverability, and seemed to behave in ways that implied intelligence, but there was never any direct communication with the objects. Looking back, the former pilot says he wished he took a more inquisitive approach to the objects. Instead of his broader assumption, it was likely just a covert military project. Over time, he came to realize that was likely far from reality, at least any reality that he understood. It wasn't until he spent time flying off the coast of Florida that he discovered pilots there were constantly encountering gimbal-shaped UAPs while flying in that area. According to Graves, the cubes and spheres and the gimbal shape were the two main crafts they were seeing regularly by pilots, at least off the Atlantic coast. But pilots on the Pacific coast, according to Graves, were encountering different shaped objects, like the Tic-Tac you've seen in the video with Commander Fravor. Graves was unable to account for the difference in shapes and regional differences or speculate why. Regardless of the shape, it was the changing behaviors that really grabbed his attention, and it continues to hold it firmly in its grasp. For Graves, the craft went from appearing as singles and doubles to much larger groups in recent years, flying in formation, performing synchronized movements. No more lone flyers. They were making a much larger presence known for unknown reasons, actions that are still being witnessed by pilots, commercial and civilian, and it hasn't stopped. But there are also more of them in the skies than before. Now, the expert in military technology says many of the objects were not observable with the naked eye until the systems they were using were upgraded. First in the early 2000s, and then again about a decade ago, revealing things they hadn't noticed before. But once they started to see them, the floodgates opened, almost as if some of these objects may be allowing themselves to be seen by humans at will. When I asked him to speak about the reported negative health effects of some of those encounters seem to have on pilots, including potentially himself, Graves was cautious, only to admit pilots don't like to talk about their health, mental or otherwise. He did acknowledge more research, funding, and support infrastructure is needed to help pilots deal with the psychological impact of these encounters and the job in general, something he felt was long overdue and will only grow in necessity over time. When it came to speculation about foreign governments or private corporations as the true source of these strange objects, he was happy to concede that that is likely a part of the equation. But there is still far too much evidence, both hard, anecdotal, plus a lot of common sense, that shows that is not the whole answer. You can only hide so much for so long. If there is a giant manufacturing infrastructure producing crafts out of the rarest, hardest to find materials on Earth and our solar system for more than 80 years, including some materials with reported atomic structures that don't originate in our part of the Milky Way, someone is going to notice that food truck outside the factory. Graves admits it would be nearly impossible to hide that kind of mass military manufacturing for so many decades, with so many high-level groups and individuals kept out of the loop. Everything leaves breadcrumbs. That kind of operation would leave a trail of bags of flour behind it, particularly given the high numbers seen around the world in different countries over history, probably as far back as thousands and thousands of years. It doesn't fit together as a really plausible explanation that these things are just covert human technology, at least from our era. Graves also claimed to have no knowledge of the many reported sightings of extremely large UAPs, some the size of football stadiums or bigger, sometimes allegedly seen discharging smaller moving objects. Now, Graves is very much a facts-first person. He leaves all the speculation to others. For him, there is just too much hard data about observable concerns already front and center to bother going down rabbit holes and reaching for other speculative ideas. Take the bird in the hand. That is why he is helping spearhead efforts with his lead role with the unidentified aerospace phenomena community of interests. It's to help gather and promote a public data resource full of useful information about the issue that can bring as many minds together to work on this for the greater public good. Graves admits that what he has seen, along with his buddies who are still flying today, remains beyond the scope and scale of their equipment, knowledge, and experience to give a clear understanding of these things or where they are coming from. When you've had the kind of storied career that he's had in the military, becoming one of the most important people in the sky helping defend the United States, he is literally in a small class of exceptional pilots. But if what he saw tells him that this is something we are not properly dealing with as a society, which other important voices should we be listening to more than his? You know, where they're coming from and why? The former aviator does not know. But he says this is likely not a singular issue or phenomenon. It is just something that is a small part of a complex and multifaceted issue, something that's just as complex as the modern weapons of war he used to fly. He also adds, like so many others, that it could be from something that is already among us here on Earth that is not traveling from a far distance or another world. That's an idea that is much easier to digest by the public masses as a whole, at least when the idea of a possible otherworldly threat has to come from far, far away. Rather than the very unnerving idea that distance between us and something else is much closer than we think, which should be enough to push all of us to want to close this vast knowledge gap even faster. I'm Sean. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed the content, and don't forget to subscribe. There's new content coming all the time. Thanks for listening.